Hello everyone, my name is Olivia and welcome to another Recent Reads. And this Recent Reads is being sponsored again by Skillshare, so thank you so much to them. So we are up to 30 books, I believe, so these are going to be my 21st reads to my 30th read. This Recent Reads actually has a lot of rereads, which is very rare for me because I don't tend to reread a lot of books. I tend to stick to reading new books and I don't really enjoy rereading, but for some reason I decided to reread a ton of books in this portion of my recent reads. So the first trilogy that I decided to reread was the Infernal Devices, and I decided to reread this trilogy not only because it's my favorite trilogy from Cassandra Clare, but also because Chain of Gold recently came out, and Chain of Gold follows the children of the main characters in this trilogy. So I wanted to brush up on this trilogy, remind myself what these characters went through, and I read this because I have terrible book memory, like to the point where I thought that Will Herondale was an only child, but no, he has two sisters, and like one sister's actually really part of the storyline, and I completely forgot that aspect of the story. So I most definitely needed to reread this before going to Chain of Gold, and I'm so glad I did because I got to fall back in love with the story, and it's so much more different now reading it as a 22-year-old compared to reading it in high school, because in high school I was obsessed with Will Herondale and I thought he was the most amazing character in the world, but now reading it as a 22-year-old who craves comfort and normalcy and security, I love Jem so much more, and now I can like compare and contrast which ones I like. I love them both equally, but like I just really appreciated Jem and what he had to offer this time around, and it was just so full of the feels. I cried so much while finishing Clockwork Princess because I completely forgot how it ended, and that just completely crushed me, and I'm so glad that I reread this, and I want to reread more of my favorite series now that I went through this, went through the hardships, went through the good times, the bad times, and it just like reignited my love for the Infernal Devices. After reading the Infernal Devices, I also had to read Ghosts of the Shadow Market, which is a novella bind-up by Cassandra Clare. It's all about the characters from the Infernal Devices, it's about the characters from Chain of Gold, introducing you to them, and it introduces their backstory. So I feel like it's very much imperative that you read that before going to Chain of Gold, because I feel like if you start Chain of Gold, you're gonna miss a lot of the characters' backstories, and you're gonna be surprised as the series goes on. But if you read Ghosts of the Shadow Market, you'll understand the characters a little bit more, if that makes sense. So I really enjoyed it. I'm not a fan of novella bind-ups. I don't really find them necessary to the storyline, but this one was actually very much yet necessary. So I'm glad I read it. I skipped a couple of stories that I just don't care about. Like I think like one about Simon, and I think one about the characters from the Mortal Instruments, because I'll be honest, I'm not really into those characters anymore. I just don't really enjoy the Mortal Instruments compared to the Dark Artifices and the Infernal Devices, so I kind of skipped those stories and I'm totally fine with it. I feel like that series needs to be laid to rest, and I just don't really enjoy it coming back to life every single time a new story comes out from Cassandra Clare. That's just like a hot take that I had to mention. So I skipped a couple of those stories, but overall I felt like the novella was really fun. It introduced me to new characters, made me fall in love with them, and it was a grand old time. I have like two notebooks. The next book that I read on audiobook is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And Robin is indigenous. She is part of the Potawatomi Nation, and she basically talks both about her life but also her connection to nature and to plants and the importance of nature. So she discusses how humans work with nature and how we should appreciate how the food comes from nature and goes across the nation to come to our tables. She talks about the beauty of language and how she taught herself Potawatomi because she did not know it previously, and it is considered a language that is slowly dying out because not a lot of people know it. So she wanted to keep that fire of her culture and her history alive by learning the language and connecting herself more to her ancestors. And it talks a lot about indigenous diaspora, and it talks about how we should remember to appreciate appreciate nature and all that it does for us and all that we can do for it. And it's just a wonderful nonfiction about the beauty of nature. And I just really enjoy nature. I wanted to be a zoologist in high school and the beginning of college. So learning more about nature and just like the different things that she has learned along the way of how different pieces of nature function throughout the seasons was so interesting. I feel like if you really enjoy learning about the environment, the importance of it, and you also want to learn about indigenous culture as well, I think Braiding Sweetgrass is a wonderful novel. It is narrated by Robin herself, so it's really great. It feels very personal, and I had a lot of fun with it. Before we move on with my next recent reads, let me tell you a little bit about this video sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community offering classes on a world of topics like film, photography, creative writing, productivity, and so much more for those looking to develop some skills or try something completely new. There are so many classes you can take relating to your interests. For me, I have been watching classes on journaling, plant care, minimalism, and some art classes as well. If you are interested in joining Skillshare, the first 1,000 of you to click the link in my description will get 2 free months of Skillshare to try out for yourself. New classes are always being added to their site, so if you want to continue your membership, it will only be $10 a month. Now, onto the recent reads. Then I read an absolutely ridiculous play, and it is The Importance of Being Ernest by Oscar Wilde. This was my April #Let's Read plays that I read for Instagram, where I try and read one play every single month for the year, and The Importance of Being Ernest is such a wonderful play. It is about 2 men who kind of get caught in a web of lies that they have created. So they both end up pretending to be this man called Ernest, and it gets them into a whole bunch of shenanigans. It's a very short play that I read, I think, literally in one sitting, and it was just full of such witty banter, and it reminded me a lot of the banter that Will and Jem have from the Infernal Devices, the way that they just bounce back and forth between each other, and the way that they're able to create such a funny yet serious conversation was magnificent. I really enjoy Oscar Wilde. I really enjoyed The Picture of Dorian Gray. I thought it was wonderful, dramatic, and I just feel like all his stories has such a flair for the dramatics in each of them, and I was completely blown away by The Importance of Being Ernest, and I just wish it was a little bit longer, to be honest. I wanted to know what was going to happen next, and it just ended so suddenly. So I think that's like the only thing that like left me a little bit disappointed, but I still gave it like 5 out of 5 stars. It was absolutely wonderful, laugh out loud, and it has some really funny lines, so I would highly recommend this if you're looking for a play to read. Then I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold during the stay-at-home reading rush. I have an entire reading vlog centered basically around this book. So I feel like if you want me to go into depth about this book specifically, you could just watch that vlog, which I will link down below. But this is about a magical cafe in Japan where if you pour a cup of coffee while sitting in a specific seat, you are able to time travel to any period of time that you want to go to. So this story is split into 4 parts. It follows 4 different characters, and these characters want to go back to a specific time where they can talk to someone from the past. So the whole catch of this is, yes, they can time travel in this cafe, in this specific seat, but they must come back to the present before their coffee gets cold. So that's kind of the whole premise of it. I really enjoyed it. It's a very slow moving novel. It just feels like a cup of coffee that you're just kind of savoring for yourself and you don't want it to end. And I had a lot of fun with it. I know a lot of people said it was slow and it wasn't that engaging, but I kind of like those quiet dramas where nothing substantial is happening. They're not changing the whole course of history by time traveling. They're just trying to reconcile with people from their past and just kind of tie up loose ends by time traveling in this wonderful cafe. So you're not going to get a lot of history about the cafe and how it can even time travel, but I don't really mind that. I cared more about the characters than the actual world that was created that's fantastical. If you're very much into world building and the reasonings as to why things happen in like fantastical novels, I feel like you might be disappointed because you're not going to learn a lot about the cafe. This is much more about the characters who attend the cafe. but I thought it was wonderful. It was great. I spoke a lot more about it in my reading vlog, so if you want to see that, it's going to be down below. Another book that I reread was Sheets, and this is one of my favorite graphic novels in the world. This is a middle grade graphic novel centered around a girl who works at her family's laundromat, which is being haunted by a little ghost in a sheet. And it is so wonderful. It is beautifully colored. It has such wonderful drawings. It's a little bit melancholic, but like it still puts a smile to my face because the way that the art style is and the way that the story flows, it just like brings a lot of comfort to me. And I just really appreciate the coloring and the color palette for the story. And I think it's a very underrated graphic novel. I want more people to read it. I absolutely love Sheets, and I can't believe I got an ARC of it at Book Expo, I think in like 2018, and I just like fell completely in love with it. And I didn't know it was going to be like such a surprising book that I cling on to and want to reread over and over again. The next book I read is another nonfiction, and it is For Small Creatures Such as We: Rituals for Finding Meaning in an Unlikely World by Sasha Sagan. This is a very interesting novel. Sasha Sagan is a person who relies more on science than belief in religion and theology and philosophy. So her take on life is very scientific. So she's trying to find new rituals and meaning in our world that aren't based on traditional religious traditions like Christmas and Easter and all of that. She talks about giving birth, all the different seasons and their meanings behind them, and the traditions that come along with each season. She talks about weddings and anniversaries and her relationship with her husband and her daughter, who she's trying to teach to be very open-minded, and she's trying to give her a very new way of looking at life. And I thought this nonfiction was so wonderful because it kind of opens your eyes to a new perspective in life. I'm very much scientific based as well, so I related a lot to her, and I also just really enjoyed the fact that she made me like kind of step back and realize that these small things in life are actually really important and wonderful and special. Like, one of my favorite lines from this book is the fact that she's talking about how each of us being born is such a wonderful and special experience. Like, so many circumstances had to have happened to lead to our eventual birth. So she says, whatever your ancestry, the list of wars, raids, plagues, famines, and droughts your genetic material had to overcome is stunning. All this in order to arrive at the moment where you, exactly you, are ready to depart your mother's womb and come into this great wide world. It kind of teaches me to just appreciate the small things in life that you would normally take for granted. Like, your existence is something so unique and wonderful all on its own. And it kind of like just reminds you that like nobody else is like you. You are one person on your own that nobody else can compare to. You're just completely unique, and there are so many different situations and circumstances that had to come to your existence. So I really enjoyed this nonfiction because it made me appreciate those small things. But there were certain chapters that I skipped, like anniversaries and weddings, because like I can't relate to that. I'm not married. I don't have a spouse, so I can't like relate to those special feelings that people have. But it was just a very eye-opening, very unique type of nonfiction that I had a lot of fun with. And for my 30th read, I finished a trilogy that I've been listening to all on audiobook, and it is The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the third and final book in I think it's the Winter Night trilogy. And this is a trilogy about a girl named Vasilisa, and she is kind of the black sheep of her family. She's very much connected to the spirits of her town that she wants to take care of, and her family is very much religious based. And she kind of stumbles along and kind of teams up with Morosko, who's basically Jack Frost in Russian folklore. And this trilogy is basically an adventure where she goes across Russia to save these different towns that are being overrun by these cruel leaders, and it talks a lot about these spirits that she's connected to and other people are connected to. And it's just a wonderful trilogy. I don't really want to talk about the third one because that's going to spoil the whole trilogy, but I really enjoyed how it wrapped up. It kind of gave me everything that I wanted and didn't leave me like unsatisfied. It just kind of wrapped up really nicely, and it's very rare for trilogies to do that. Usually they end up tragic or just like in an ending that you don't really enjoy, but this one I really enjoyed and I had a lot of fun with it. So I'm glad I finally finished that trilogy because I never tend to finish trilogies, but I did for this one, and I had so much fun with it. I love Vasilisa, and I'm just really glad that I picked up this series. And the audiobook narrator is wonderful. I could have not imagined reading it physically because the narrator has such wonderful Russian pronunciations. She has different voices for different characters. She's just a wonderful narrator. I would highly recommend listening to this trilogy on audiobook if you're looking for something to read. They're relatively short, they're not too long, so they're like an easy trilogy to dive into, and it's already finished. So you don't have to wait for another book to come out, so that's also great. So those are the next 10 books that I have recently read. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know if you have some awesome nonfiction recommendations. I would love to hear them. And also let me know if you are like me, where you don't reread often, or maybe you love rereading books. I would love to know. I'm trying to get more into rereading books because, like I said before, I have terrible book memory, so I think it would be beneficial for me to reread some of my favorite series because I forget so much of the books that I read. That's why I started this journal where I write down every single plot point of a book into this journal. So if I forget about a book like Chain of Gold, which I recently read, I can just go to Chain of Gold and reread what the book is about. So it's great. It's great for my bad book memory. So if you have bad book memory as well, I would highly recommend keeping a book journal. It's a little tedious to write down every single plot point of the book, but future you will thank you when you forget a book that you read and you go back to this journal and you're like, oh, that's what happened. That's how these characters got together. So that's just a little tidbit and little thing that I've been getting into, which is book journaling. And it's very simple. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just writing down plot points of what happens in a book. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Stories for Coffee if you want to see what I'm currently reading. I always post about that on my stories, and I hope you have a great day. Happy reading! Bye!